Hello guys, today I'm going to present my first research topic, and this is going to be part 1. Right now I'm going to talk about Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor and when the United States joined the war, and we're going to see how the United States, changed the outcome of the war. Alright, and we're going to see how and why Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. So I chose to go to jstor.org. It's um it's like a library, like an online library recommended by the university by Saul Ross. And this article is going to show us why Japan, attacked Pearl Harbor. Okay, so here we see like the introduction on on the article, and here we see the start of Imperial Japan and their invasion of China. It is all going to lead to Pearl Harbor, I promise. So, with the help of Germany, Japan invades China, but is only able to take over the southern part of the country due to Russia aiding the communist China. So, and the United States, they were kind of pretty disgusted by, Japan's actions. And so they provided resources, materials, and economic support to China, which is kind of crazy, considering how our relationship with China is nowadays. And so, yeah, they got on Japan's bad side because of that. And the United States answered to that by deploying its Pacific Fleet from Hawaii to stop Japan from expanding and, getting, you know, stronger. So that made Japan pretty pissed, pretty mad. That made Japan pretty mad. And so, because of that, Japan finally signed the Tripartite Act, which in 1940, which was, when Japan joined with Italy and Germany as the Axis powers. This, is it's already, all coming together, and see how Japan was with, it's all coming together to see how Japan, allied, with Germany and Italy. Let's see. Here we see, the Japan. Here they talk about the Japanese and the U.S. fleet and how they were growing during the war, and how the U.S. withdrew materials and economic sanctions from Japan. This is what got us in Japan's bad side. Here, Japan signs the Tripartite Act with Germany and Italy, and they form the Axis powers. And here is when they finally decide to start attacking the United States. And the Japanese leaders got together as they were iffy on attacking the United States and believed that attacking would make problems much worse. He talk about President Roosevelt's and Nomura's meeting and how Japan didn't listen to the United States' warnings. We were already like in a horrible relationship at this point, and war was pretty much inevitable. Here we see with the when the emperor gives the general consent to war, and that's when they started going with the war plans. That's when they started planning the attack. And of course, Tokyo was not a dictatorship, so that's why they did take a while to plan the attack on Pearl Harbor. And here we see that after the planning, that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto pretty much decided for the country.
Yamamoto was the last decision. He was the last to vote before deciding the attack on the United States.
And he played the critical role in deciding to attack Hawaii's Pearl Harbor. And he agreed with war and believed that after 1 or 2 years of war,
Japanese
the United
dropped
States will grow
an
tired and
enormous
will
1,800
eventually
pound
settle on an
bomb
agreement,
that smashed
which
through the deck
he
of
was
the USS
completely
Arizona
wrong.
and trapped over
We all know what
1,000 men
happens.
that were
Now we
inside the
move on to
battleship.
history.com, and here we see the Japanese plan was simple, right? Destroy the Pacific Fleet. That way the Americans could not fight back with their ships, right? That way they could not control Japan with their ships. After months of planning and practice, they finally launched their attack, and at 8:10 a.m., so that first attack already, killed 1,000 people, 1,000, like over 1,000 men. Next, torpedoes destroy USS Oklahoma with 400 sailors aboard. And less than 2 hours later, the surprise attack was over, and every battleship in Pearl Harbor had dealt some significant damage. In the aftermath, we can see that the attack on Pearl Harbor damaged or destroyed almost 20 American ships and more than 300 planes. Docks and airfields were destroyed, and 2,403 people were killed in the attack, while over 1,000 were wounded. Even with this tragedy, the Japanese failed in crippling the Pacific Fleet, and by the 1940s, battleships were no longer relevant at that time. They were no longer as important as aircraft carriers. And guess what? The Pacific Fleet carriers were not in Pearl Harbor during the attack. So the Japanese attack was successful, but at the same time, it wasn't. And now we move on to PearlHarbor.org, and here we learn why the United States not joined the war sooner and before the Pearl Harbor attack. Here we see here we see a couple of reasons. One was having a lackluster military. We did not have a good military at the time. We were not prepared for having a war. The war was not influencing the American economy, so why would Americans care about the war if it wasn't affecting them or their lives? And to put it simple, the president of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, did not want anything to do with the war since the country has already had they already had problems of their own. And pretty much, I think that was the biggest one. The country already had problems. The Americans already had to deal with their own problems after the Great Depression. So and after World War One. So why would they enter a war
Beat the Axis powers.
that would not affect them? You know. And that all changed when the Japanese uh, attacked the harbor at Hawaii, and that's when the Americans entered the war. And after that, we know what happens. The Americans dropped the bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Japan was out. And with the help of Great Britain and the Soviet Union, the Allied forces.
See you guys again
So
next
I
week.
think